she didn't send a driver. That detail matters. In the world that Shohei Ohtani occupies, the world of nine-figure contracts and private vehicles and security personnel and the careful, managed infrastructure that surrounds a person when they have become more than an athlete and something closer to an institution, sending a driver would have been the expected thing. The logical thing. The thing that the people around him would have arranged without being asked, because arranging things is what they do, and because the hospital exit of the most famous baseball player on earth was exactly the kind of moment that required arrangement. Mamiko drove herself. She pulled up in their personal car. Not a vehicle chosen for discretion or security optics. Their car. The one that exists inside the private version of their life rather than the public version. And in the back seat, in the particular arrangement of a family that had spent days apart in circumstances that nobody plans for and nobody wants, were two presences that completed the picture in a way that no organizational statement or carefully managed press exit could have. Their daughter. And Decopin. Decopin did not understand what had happened. That is the thing about dogs. They do not track injury timelines or read medical documents or watch press conferences with the specific anxiety of people who love someone and are trying to extract reassurance from the careful language of professionals. They track presence and absence. They know when someone has been gone, and they know the precise moment when that person is no longer gone. When the hospital door opened and Ohtani appeared and Decopin understood, with whatever sense dogs use for this understanding, that the absence was over, the reaction was not complicated. It was immediate and total, and it made several of the photographers who had been maintaining professional composure for hours do something that photographers at staged media events rarely do. They lowered their cameras for a moment. Not all of them. Not for long. But enough of them, for long enough, that the moment registered as something that existed outside the usual transaction between a public figure and the people whose job is to document them. It was a dog greeting the person it had been waiting for. Simple and complete, and, in the context of everything that had preceded it, the 15-page medical record, the heavy bandaging, the quiet face on the morning of discharge, unexpectedly moving. Mamiko had the engine running when the side door opened. She had positioned the car with the same deliberateness that had characterized every decision she had made since the hospitalization. Not at the main entrance where the largest cluster of cameras was positioned. Not in the official discharge area where the hospital's own protocols would have governed the timeline and the exposure. She had identified the point of minimum distance and maximum privacy, and she had been there, engine running, before he appeared. When she saw him, she got out of the car. She did not assess the cameras first. She did not compose herself in the way that people who are aware of being observed sometimes compose themselves. She got out of the car and she walked toward him with the directness of someone for whom the cameras had, in that moment, genuinely ceased to exist. She embraced him at the midpoint between the car and the door. And she wept. Not the careful, controlled emotion of a public figure managing their image at a sensitive moment. Not the brief, photogenic tear that gets selected for the front page. The weeping of someone who had been holding something for several days and had reached the precise moment when holding it was no longer necessary, and the body, understanding this, released it without asking permission. Ohtani held her with his uninjured arm. His bandaged arm remained slightly away from her body, not by emotional choice but by physical necessity, and that small accommodation, the embrace shaped around the injury rather than the injury disappearing into the embrace, was visible in every photograph taken in those seconds. He said something to her. Low. Close to her ear. Not for anyone outside the two of them. She nodded against his shoulder. His first public words came 90 seconds later. Not at a press conference. Not through a prepared statement delivered by a representative. In the specific, unmanaged way that first words sometimes emerge, in response to something immediate and real, before the filters that public life installs in a person have fully re-engaged. A reporter, positioned close enough to be heard but not so close as to intrude on the family moment, called out a question. The question was the obvious one. The one that baseball and its surrounding media apparatus needed answered. How are you feeling? When will you be back? What is the timeline? Ohtani turned toward the voice. And what he said was not the answer to any of those questions. He looked at Decopin, who had found his way to Ohtani's feet and had not moved from them since, and he said, quietly, in Japanese, which his interpreter relayed to the reporters present, that the first thing he had thought about every morning in the hospital was taking Decopin for a walk. He paused. Then he said he had also thought about his daughter's laugh. Then, after another pause, he said he had thought about pitching. The order of those three things was noted by every journalist in that parking area. Some of them wrote it down before he had finished the sentence. The order was not accidental and everyone present understood that. A man revealing his priorities through the sequence of what he missed. The walk with the dog. His daughter's laugh. The mound. Baseball third. In a different context, from a different kind of athlete, that ordering might have generated concern. Questions about commitment. Inferences about motivation. But from Ohtani, who has never needed to perform his dedication because his dedication has always simply been visible in the results, the ordering communicated something else entirely. It communicated who he actually was when the contract and the statistics and the marketing apparatus were temporarily set aside. The device on his right knee was the other thing that stopped people. It had been visible in the discharge photographs but had not been addressed in any official statement. Not because it had been deliberately concealed, but because the Dodgers' communications, in the days following the initial injury announcement, had been focused on the pitching arm, on the inflammation, on the 1-month timeline. The knee, introduced carefully by the GM as a secondary finding requiring monitoring, had not been given a name or a device or a treatment protocol in any public communication. And yet there it was. Fitted beneath his clothing but partially visible as he moved toward the car. A structured device, clearly medical in purpose, that sat on the right knee with the specificity of something that had been chosen for a reason rather than applied generically. Not a standard compression wrap. Not the kind of support that athletic trainers apply routinely to manage ordinary joint soreness. Something more considered than that. Medical analysts who examined the photographs in the hours after they circulated offered assessments that ranged from cautious to specific. Several identified characteristics consistent with a device used to manage localized inflammation while maintaining some degree of joint mobility. One former team physician, speaking in general terms without access to Ohtani's actual records, noted that the positioning and apparent structure of the device suggested it was addressing something in the posterior compartment of the knee. Something that would not prevent walking or ordinary movement but that would need to be fully resolved before the rotational demands of a pitching delivery could be safely placed on it. The 15-page medical record had positioned the knee as a contributing factor. The device on his right knee, visible to anyone with a photograph and enough medical knowledge to interpret it, confirmed that the contributing factor was being actively treated rather than simply monitored. These were two different things. And the people who understood the difference went quiet for a while after they understood it. The All-Star game sat in the background of all of it. It had happened. It had run its scheduled hours. It had produced its moments and its highlights and its post-game analysis. And across all of it, in the American coverage and the Japanese coverage and in the baseball conversation that had briefly become larger than baseball, Ohtani's absence had been present in the way that significant absences are present. Named. Referenced. Debated. The debate about whether he should have played had not fully resolved itself. It existed in the space between the people who saw the withdrawal as responsible and the people who saw it as something else. But the photographs from the hospital discharge, the heavy bandaging on the arm, the device on the knee, the careful movement toward the car, the way Mamiko had wept, those photographs did something to the debate that arguments could not do. They made it concrete. The question of whether Ohtani should have played in the All-Star game was no longer a question about commitment or courage or obligation to the fans who had voted for him. It was a question about whether a man with that arm and that knee, moving that carefully toward a car where his daughter and his dog were waiting, should have been standing in an exhibition stadium performing for a broadcast. The photographs answered the question without being asked it. Several of the commentators who had used the hardest language in the days following the withdrawal, the ones who had reached for words like coward and obligation and running away, went notably quiet in the 24 hours after the discharge images circulated. Not all of them. Some doubled down, because doubling down is always available as a posture. But several went quiet in the specific way of people who have encountered information that does not fit the narrative they have been constructing and need time to decide what to do with it. Decopin fell asleep in Ohtani's lap before the car reached the highway. His daughter, according to a source close to the family who later spoke to a Japanese media outlet, held his uninjured hand for the entire drive. She did not ask about baseball. She did not ask about the injury or the device on his knee or when he would pitch again. She talked about something she had seen on television while he was in the hospital. Something small and specific and completely unrelated to any of the things that the rest of the world had been discussing for the past several days. Ohtani listened to all of it. Mamiko drove. Both hands on the wheel. Eyes on the road. The weeping from the parking area was finished now, replaced by the particular quiet of a family in a car going home, which is one of the most ordinary things in the world and which, after the preceding days, was exactly what all of them needed it to be. The mysterious device on his knee caught the afternoon light through the window as the car moved through traffic. Nobody in the car was looking at it.